that's one way to do it. But if you're just kind of like trying to optimize your body composition and you want to do it in a way that you can do over the long term, I would say tackle both at the same time. Welcome to the Optimize and Thrive podcast, episode number 1. So we are going to start with just introducing the topic that we're going to talk about today. Then I will introduce myself and Kai, who is with me on the podcast today, and just the podcast in general. So what we're going to be digging into today is steps to take to optimize body composition using nutrition and DEXA scans. So a lot of body composition talk today, which I find is something that people are very interested in, and I get lots of questions about this in my daily practice. But first, I did want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about me, and then I'll tell you a little bit about why we're even doing this whole podcast thing. So my name is Tarah Valenti. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm also a DEXA tech, which technically is a bone densitometrist, but basically what that means is just that I can use a DEXA scanner to analyze body composition, and I can read and interpret those results. I'm also the director of nutrition at Custom Fit. So if you've ever been to Custom Fit in San Francisco, you may have seen me around the studios there. Custom Fit is basically it's a multidisciplinary wellness space that offers data-driven health programs, including everything from blood work to DEXA scans to VO2 max, nutrition coaching, and more. So we kind of have the personal training and the fitness side of things happening, and then we've got all of these really cool bells and whistles to attach to that process to just optimize health and wellness. And that's what I do on a daily basis. And with me today is Kai, who is also a registered dietitian at Custom Fit. Kai, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Tarah. My name is Kai Samiere, registered dietitian, master of health and wellness management. And yeah, I've been joining Custom Fit for the last year, working with people through a lot of sport-based, athletic-driven, performance nutrition. I was thankful enough to have had a lot of experience at Stanford through my undergrad at Cal Poly, and just seeing a lot of the collegiate sports nutrition, all that goes into it, it was really eye-opening. And so a few years later, I was able to join Custom Fit and bring some of those skills to helping everyday athletes, the weekend warriors, and applying, some of those techniques to, developing a more sustainable eating for people who aren't doing maybe as much or trying to do as much as the collegiate athlete or elite athlete. So that's kind of me, and learning a lot as we go, always curious, asking questions. So we'll see.
Nice. Yeah, I think it kind of interesting. Kai and I both have some background at Stanford, and both of us are super interested in just that performance side of nutrition, but also just helping like your average everyday person level up and feel a little bit more like they want to feel, like feeling better energy and stronger and kind of feeling like they're optimizing so they can thrive. So in terms of the podcast and why we were inspired to start doing the podcast, what we're really hoping for is to be kind of like that voice in your ear that inspires you to keep going, really. Like nutrition and fitness, it can be really hard to wake up every day and keep putting the work in. And I think that sometimes listening to a podcast or hearing someone talk about a topic, whether that's something specific like body composition stuff, or something a little bit more fluffy like motivation can be just a really excellent thing to incorporate in your daily commute or whatever it may be. So I want to be that. I want to kind of supplement the work that I do with my clients by also having an additional source of motivation that they can tap into and that anyone can tap into to be inspired to, like I said, keep putting the work in. Um, what we plan to do mix of digging into these topics that we are experts in, have some experts who are knowledgeable about topics that maybe we know a little bit less about come in and talk about things that are of interest to this audience. And also to just share stories and talk about some successes that we've seen with the clients that we work with and stuff like that. So that's what you're in for. And yeah, I think we'll dig into the meat of today's podcast now.
Yeah. So kind of getting into it, today we're talking about optimizing body composition through mainly nutrition and the DEXA scan. So like Tara mentioned, the DEXA scan is one of the tools we have at Custom Fit. Um, and it's a really unique way of getting a look at your body composition, very accurate and used in a lot of clinical trials that um, track and analyze body composition over a period of time, do certain interventions. So we're going to talk about these things, kind of starting with, body composition in general. What do we mean by that? And so maybe Tara, if you want to talk a little bit about what body composition is, what is, optimizing body composition, and how can people get the most out of their nutrition?
Yeah, so I know the term body composition is something that I feel like a lot of people don't really think about when they think about changing their bodies. It's becoming more well known, this concept of focusing more on specifics around body composition. But what a lot of people start with and what a lot of people reach out to me asking about is weight loss. Like, I just want to lose weight. And we're missing a lot of important data when we're just talking about body weight. Like when we just talk about how much you weigh on the scale, that's not telling us much about your actual physical health. So when we use a tool like a DEXA scanner, we're able to see how much muscle mass you have, how much body fat you have. We're able to look at a special type of fat called visceral fat or visceral adipose tissue, which is the fat that's in your abdominal cavity surrounding your organs. This is the stuff that sometimes people just call it the bad fat. And if you have an excessive amount of visceral fat, you're at a higher risk for things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, these chronic metabolic conditions that really nobody wants, right? So it's helpful to know, okay, do I have too much body fat? Do I have too much visceral fat? And then from there, we can kind of talk about what we want to do in terms of optimizing your body composition, whether that's increasing muscle mass. We usually rank people in terms of percentile. I shouldn't say rank, that makes it sound like we're, yeah, ranking people. But, we categorize people based on percentile for muscle mass and for body fat. We can kind of see where we need to focus our priorities and talk to the individual too, because your ideal body composition is self-defined. So you kind of get to decide where you feel at your strongest, where you feel at your best physically. But the DEXA scanner is a really great way to figure out what your baseline is, make some changes, and then measure those changes using something that's extremely accurate to see what the results are.
It's a great summary. Yeah, and I would just follow question is like when you work with people, how do you start with them? How do you build their plan, and kind of, what goals do you see most commonly? I know some of the clients I've worked with and seen, it all varies. So, for the people who don't understand, maybe kind of diving into that side of things.
Yeah, it totally does vary. And a lot of times people come in thinking they have one goal and they do a DEXA scan and they totally change what their goals are based on what their results are. I would say it kind of depends on what they want to focus on. So sometimes it's more like functional fitness. They want to just be able to do day-to-day activities, your activities of daily living, walking up the stairs, playing with your grandkids, you know, being able to garden, basic things like that, having better energy levels. Some people are more focused on measures of health. So maybe they have gotten some biomarkers that don't look great. Maybe their blood sugar isn't looking great, or maybe their blood lipids, like their cholesterol, aren't looking great. So that might be a motivating factor. Some people care more about aesthetics, performance. Everyone's goals are different, but I find that probably the majority of people that I work with and interact with are trying to increase muscle mass and lose body fat. And most of them want to do both at the same time. So
So, and that's what you say is that's a tricky, it sounds tricky, right? Balancing
it,
both.
yeah, it can be like a little bit of a tricky balance. Over the years. I mean, I've been doing this for like so long now. I've gotten pretty good at it, for myself and for people that I work with. So there is a little bit of kind of like a dance that you have to do. And I've heard so many times people think that you have to choose one, like you have to focus on increasing muscle mass or losing body fat. And that's a way to do it. Like it's basically called cutting and bulking, and a lot of people do cycle through those, but it's not the only way that it needs to be done, and you can lose body fat and increase muscle mass at the same time.
And yeah, I think that's a good point and goes a lot to the sustainability side of, what we coach on. And I think that's something I see with a lot of the clients I work with is, they're stuck in that bulk cut versus you can combine the both two and kind of create a sustainable approach to just achieving optimal health. You're not eating in excess and you're not eating too restricted. So you're finding that perfect medium. Your macronutrients are aligned and all these things that we'll kind of get into later. But yeah, just
Yeah.
kind of looking long term versus these short week or month based cycles.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I really like about the method of, or the strategy of attacking both at the same time, is that it is more sustainable. Like if you're doing a bulk phase, you have to eat so much food, like so much food. And that can be really, really challenging. A lot of people really struggle with just getting enough calories in a way that is healthy, getting good quality calories in. I know some people will do like what's called a dirty bulk, where they're piling in ice cream and pizza, and that's how they're getting their calories in. That's not ideal, right? That kind of defeats the purpose. And then in contrast, when you're in a cutting phase, that can feel torturous. I mean, your calories have to be really low in order to lose body fat that quickly, and that's not really sustainable either. And for some people, for bodybuilders and physique competitors and people like that, doing kind of that cycle, it works for them. And that's not no, no shade against that. Like I feel like that's one way to do it. But if you're just kind of like trying to optimize your body composition and you want to do it in a way that you can do over the long term, I would say tackle both at the same time.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think there's no one size fits all, no cookie cutter approach to nutrition. So if you're willing to put up with the highs and lows of that cycle, go for it. But I think it's easy to get thrown off with, travel, sickness. You're having a bad day. Sometimes you're just not hungry. So
Yeah,
just let life
totally.
kind of play by ear. But I guess kind of getting back to some of the things about the DEXA before we kind of get into the nutrition, is there anything else like uh, to specifically look for or certain measurements that maybe help when building a plan or you know
Yeah.
before tackling certain? macronutrients?
For sure. Great question. So yeah, I think we'll tackle this, and then next I want to dig into kind of like the steps for actually doing this thing. So when you get a DEXA scan, and if you're not familiar with what a DEXA scan is, um, hopefully you've kind of pieced it together. It's a way to measure body composition. It is X-ray. We have one at Custom Fit that we have at our fingertips, which is awesome. So we use that in-house with our clients. You can, if you're not living in the Bay Area, you can get a DEXA scan elsewhere. And it is just a great way to kind of get a baseline measurement. When you do one at Custom Fit, we have specific things that we're looking for to help determine where you're at in terms of your health and your body composition. And we go over your results with you and let you know exactly what your numbers are looking like. And as a dietitian, one thing that I always pay attention to is the percentiles that you fall into for your fat mass index and your lean mass index. So fat mass index is how much fat you have on your body compared to your height. And lean mass index is the same thing, but for lean mass, which we're mostly talking about muscle mass when we talk about lean mass. And we get that data from doing your DEXA scan, and then we categorize you into these different percentiles. And we can kind of see, based on this, what do we need to focus on the most? And I've seen every single combination that can possibly exist in this department. But sometimes I'll see people who are like in the 90th percentile for muscle mass and the 90th percentile for body fat. And so in that case, we're probably going to want to structure the nutrition and the exercise to focus a little bit more on losing body fat. I've also seen people who are in the opposite direction, where they have very little body fat and hardly any muscle mass. They're maybe in like the 5th percentile for muscle mass or 10th percentile for muscle mass. So we're going to structure their diet so that they are focusing more on increasing muscle mass and not so much focusing on the body fat side of things. And then, most of us fall somewhere in between there, like not extreme in any direction. So depending on where you're at, maybe you're in like the 40th percentile or 30th percentile, let's say, for muscle mass, and your body fat is in the 60th percentile. Great candidate for exactly what we're going to talk about today, which is increasing muscle mass, losing body fat at the same time. And I would say that's what I see the most often, is people who are kind of like structured somewhere around the middle, with a little bit of variation in there. And our goal is to bump up the muscle, lose the body fat. And it's kind of cool because they work together. Like as you increase muscle mass, it becomes a little bit easier to lose body fat in those cases. So I would say that's the thing that I pay attention to the most. I obviously am going to care about visceral fat, and we can talk about targeting that as well. But the fat mass index and the lean mass index are a really good starting point for people.
Yeah. And it sounds like those aren't, I mean, from what we know, those aren't going to be showing up on the scale either. So that's the DEXA's importance and why you can't just have the same plan for both. So I guess getting into the nutrition, we're having somebody who's in that middle range, wanting to build muscle but also lose fat. Where do we kind of start?
So first step is measure your baseline. And DEXA scan is a great way to do that. Obviously, we've been talking about DEXA a lot. But another way to do that, get a scale weight, just see what your number looks like on the scale. That's accessible and easy. You can also take photos of yourself, so kind of like a before photo, and take measurements as well. So if you have like one of those flexible tape measure things, you can easily just order one online or buy it at the store too, and just take measurements. There's actually some really great videos online that instruct you exactly how to do that to minimize the margin of error, because there is quite a large margin of error with measuring things that way. But that's a really good way to see if you're having any changes in like circumference of like your waist, your thighs, your arms, etc. And you don't need a DEXA scanner to do that. So that's a little bit more accessible to people if you don't have a DEXA scanner. Obviously, again, it's going to be a lot less accurate, But long story short, record where you're starting in some kind of way. Next thing is setting clear goals, knowing exactly what you want to change. So if you're hoping to increase muscle mass or lose your body fat, maybe set some goals around what you want your body fat percentage to be. You're going to get that number from a DEXA scanner so you can track that over time. You might also want to set goals around how many pounds of muscle mass you want to gain or how many pounds of body fat you want to lose. Or you might just set the goal that generally you want to improve. And I like that one because all progress is progress, right? But you want to know clearly like where you're trying to get. And then from there, you're going to dial in your fitness routine because that absolutely has to complement your nutrition. You're not going to put on muscle mass just sitting there and eating lots of protein. It's not how that works. So fitness has to be dialed in. It needs to be a structured routine. And then we dig into the actual nutrition side of things.
So
Okay,
yeah, let's dive into it.
let's dive into it. So the nutrition side of things. So obviously we want to start with calories. The DEXA gives us a really great way of measuring your RMR or your resting metabolic rate, which is how many calories you burn when you're completely at rest. Because we're able to measure your lean mass down to the gram using a DEXA scanner, we're able to plug that number into an equation and get a more like individualized resting metabolic rate than if you were just using some like random online calculator, because now we know literally exactly how much muscle mass you have. And the more muscle mass you have, the more calories you burn. So that gives us a really great starting point for setting a calorie target. Even without the RMR, of course, as dietitians, me and Kai, we know how to do all these calculations and come up with recommendations for people. I always say I've been doing this a lot longer than I had access to a DEXA scan or a DEXA scanner. So you can do it without the data. It's just kind of awesome to have that level of accuracy and confirm all of your numbers using a tool like that. So you can use an RMR as a starting point to figure out how many calories you need and then multiply that by an activity factor. Those also can be found online. We can provide a link to that in the show notes. I also really like this tool called the National Institutes of Health Body Weight Planner. So with that, you basically enter a bunch of information in about yourself, your activity level, your height, your weight, your age, what your goal is, and then that gives you an estimated amount of calories that you should be targeting on a daily basis. And honestly, it's fairly accurate. I think it's a pretty good tool to use just for someone who's not working with a registered dietitian and they're trying to kind of DIY this. It's a really, really good starting point. And then if you're wondering, is this the right amount of calories for me? One of the best ways to know that is to track your weight and your rate of weight loss. So if you're losing weight faster than 2 pounds a week on average, you're in too much of a calorie deficit. Like you're probably losing muscle mass along with body fat. This is not going to be ideal if your goal is to at least maintain or increase muscle mass and lose body fat. It's not going to be ideal in general because nobody wants to lose muscle mass, right? Like, I don't know anyone who's like, oh no, I have too much muscle. Um, so check your rate of weight loss. You might not even lose weight if you have found there is a sweet spot in there where you can lose fat and gain muscle at the same rate or a very similar rate, and your body stays about the same weight, and you just replace your body fat with muscle mass. That does sometimes happen, and don't be alarmed, basically, if your body weight is not changing much on the scale. It could just be that. It could just be that you're changing your body composition um, and not actually losing weight. Kind of depends on where you start too. So if you don't have a ton of extra body fat that you're trying to lose, and that you're more likely to stay kind of like the same weight. Then if you had a lot of body fat that you needed to lose, then we would hope for your body weight to gradually start going down, and you should be ideally gaining muscle mass as well. So that's kind of the calorie side of things. Did I miss anything,
Yeah.
Kai?
No, I think that's great. That's like the beauty of the RMR from the DEXAs because it's based on, your muscle mass, essentially like tissue, like in grams. So from there, we apply a nice equation that gets you a good resting metabolic rate. And then you just kind of go from there. I think it's always a little bit of trial and error, but uh, that's where the optimizing comes in, working with a dietitian. You know, I think logging your food is a good tool to help with tracking calories if that's something you want to do, or just getting really good at estimating, reading labels if you're trying to get more accurate weighing foods, things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, besides like the calories is another big one. It's like the macronutrients. And so
yeah,
that's going to influence the type of tissue we build, store, and break down. So we can kind of get into that and see what the approach is.
totally. Yeah, so macronutrient balance, and tracking too, on the topic of that, I'm glad you brought that up. Tracking is something that a lot of people dread. Maybe they've done it in the past and they had a really hard time sticking with it, and they just feel very resistant to the idea of tracking their calories and the macronutrients again. And I will say that if you are trying to hit specific body composition goals, tracking your nutrition is a very good way to do so in an effective, accurate manner. It's not for everyone. Not everyone has to track. I know that tracking calories and macros and all these numbers and stuff, for some people, it can feel anxiety provoking. It can make them feel a lot of not good feelings. And we certainly don't want to, pressure anyone into tracking if it makes them not feel good. That's definitely not a good idea. So it's important to know yourself and know if this is an approach that will work for you or not. And if it's not, that's cool too. There are other ways to do it. That said, paying attention to body composition and all these numbers and stuff, it's a very numbers based, science. And so tracking can be an absolutely awesome tool for doing that. Usually I recommend tracking for a couple of weeks at minimum, just to identify where your gaps are. So, you might track for a couple of weeks and realize, wow, I am not hitting my protein targets. My carbs are really high. And you might also notice that like your fiber intake is just pathetic, right? Those are ones that I commonly see. And so um, I definitely recommend using it as a tool and then modifying your diet, optimizing a little bit. And then if you can't continue or you don't want to continue, don't. But at least you've learned a little bit more about what things you need to adjust to get closer to the optimal balance. Um, so in terms of optimal balance, macronutrients and macro balance, this is going to vary a little bit from person to person. Typically, I recommend going by percentages for your macronutrient balance. You can also go by grams per kilogram, so you can go by body weight. I really like using percentages because it's based on the calories that you're consuming and not solely body weight. And the reason for that is that oftentimes when people are trying to change their body composition, there are some folks who weigh considerably more than their goal weight. So if you weigh 20, 25, 50, 80 pounds higher than your goal weight, and you're basing your macronutrient goals on your current body weight, they're going to be way higher than what you actually need. And it's going to be challenging to hit those targets. It might feel completely impossible to hit those targets. And it just might not be the right balance for you. So if you focus on percentages, so percent of calories that you consume in a day, you're a lot more likely to get the correct numbers, find a balance that's actually realistic and achievable for you, and you're going to see results from that. So Um, for macronutrient balance, for increasing muscle mass and losing body fat. Typically, and this is again, this is general. So if you want customized recommendations, definitely work with an expert. But generally speaking, what is often recommended is anywhere from 25 to 30% of your calories coming from protein. That's macronutrient number one. 35 to 40% of your calories coming from carbohydrates, and 35 to 40% of your calories coming from fat. So any combination similar to that is gonna get you results. And we might slide those numbers up or slide those numbers down depending on what we know about you as an individual. Like if you're following a plant-based diet, for example, we might go a little bit on the lower end for protein, just because it might not be realistic for you to be getting 30% of your calories from protein. But that's kind of the general formula that I like to use for increasing muscle mass and decreasing body fat.
It's great. I think that's going to help a lot of people. I think it's a good general place to start, but like you said, your activity level too, what your diet is, how you, it's going to play a big role into all of that. So
Yeah.
I think that's something to, yeah, keep in mind, apply it, try it, and then see how things kind of go, and just track progress along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, activity level too, like, oh my gosh, it can play such a huge, huge role. Like if you are an endurance athlete, your numbers are going to be totally different. Like this balance might not be right for you. But you might be an endurance athlete that's trying to increase muscle mass and lose body fat. And so we're going to have to think a lot about carbohydrates and hitting your carbohydrate targets, and also how do we fuel for your activity and all of that. So there is definitely some variability depending on the individual there. But kind of the mindset behind it, or the science behind it really is like, we want to make sure that you're hitting your protein targets because you're going to be in a small calorie deficit. Um, did I talk about deficit before?
No, I think we kind of, it was kind of built into, I think, the the need to not bulk or cut, but
Yeah,
yeah, essentially we want to be in a slight deficit. We're going to lose any mass, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to the calorie target, you're absolutely going to need to be in a small calorie deficit or at maintenance level if you're hoping to lose body fat and increase muscle mass. So, we start with that. You know, you've got your small calorie deficit, or you're right around maintenance level. Both of those are effective, just kind of depends on exactly what your goals are in terms of body composition. And then from there, we get that macronutrient balance, we plug that in. Um, and with the macronutrient balance, we're focusing on getting sufficient protein while in a deficit. And the main reason for that is that you want to make sure that your muscles are fueled. Your body has the building blocks to maintain and or increase muscle mass. So if you're in a calorie deficit and you're not getting enough protein, a lot more likely to lose muscle mass along with body fat, and we don't want that. With carbs, it's similar. We want to make sure that you're getting enough carbohydrates to feel good during your workouts, to be able to increase muscle mass, but not so much carbohydrate that you're likely to store it as excess body fat. So that's where that kind of low to medium carbohydrate recommendation comes into play. And then with fat, I would say fat's kind of along for the ride. I care more about the quality of the fat in the diet than the quantity of the fat in the diet. If you're getting your fat from good, healthy sources of your mono and your polyunsaturated fatty acids, your omega-3s, that is what I care about the most. And we also use fat as a tool for making you feel full from your meals and snacks, so you're more comfortably in a calorie deficit.
Like, hit the nail on the head. That was a good point with the quality of the fats. And I think, you know, listeners are probably having a lot of questions too. And so a lot of good topics to kind of dive into further on some other episodes. Um, what are good fats? What aren't carbs, going to kill us at the end of the day? Definitely not true. And maybe why protein is so important. Like you said, maintain muscle mass, hormones, just signaling proteins, all these things within the body. So really good. Yeah, really good insights.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, to kind of like bring it all together, I think that I'm giving away all of my secrets today in this podcast, but really the idea is, if you are trying to increase muscle mass and lose body fat, we've got to be in a small calorie deficit or at maintenance in order to lose body fat. Ideally, a teeny tiny deficit. I like to call it a delicate deficit. And then we've got to have those macronutrients dialed in so that you're fueling your muscles. You're not storing carbohydrates as excess fat, but you're still getting enough to make progress in the gym. And then quality of diet is going to matter as well. And then from there, we're measuring progress using ideally something that's accurate, like a DEXA scanner. Um, we're optimizing the diet from every other perspective, right? In terms of like diet quality and checking off all the boxes from a nutrition standpoint. And the fitness routine absolutely has to be dialed in because if that piece isn't there, you're not going to see the results that you're hoping for.
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
So, I
All
mean,
right.
if you need to get any of these services, talk to us one-on-one. Tarah's available. I'm available. We have other nutrition members on our team. We have another registered dietitian, holistic nutritionists, all open to kind of working with you on certain topics. But yeah, if you're looking for body composition optimization, Tarah's your go-to. You can come to me as well. I'm very familiar on these topics, but yeah,
Yeah. I also wanted to share too, especially if you're interested in the idea of building muscle mass as a target. We have some awesome resources, and Kai is one of our experts in that topic. We have an entire ebook and program all about building muscle mass that has literally the exact formula that you'll need built into it. It's got recipes, it's got like everything you could possibly hope for if building muscle mass is something that you want to do from a nutrition perspective. And then of course, you've got to plug in that fitness side of things as well to actually increase the muscle mass. But it's not going to happen without the foundational nutrition. So that's on the website. We'll link that in the show notes as well. And yeah, like Kai said, we always offer a free nutrition consult to anyone that wants to chat. So you can connect with us at any time. And otherwise, thanks for joining us today.